How's it going, everybody? Hopefully I got all... Yeah, I did get that set up right. How's it going, everybody? A little bit of an odd start today for the live stream. I've been scrambling around, resetting up some stuff here in my office. So, yeah. Welcome to LUMIX Live this week. We are starting a series for the next 3 weeks, so this week and the next two. We're going to do kind of like what we just did for the photography side of our conversations, where we're going to talk about the various different video features. We're going to break it into kind of smaller chunks so that it's maybe a little bit easier to digest, and go over hopefully some things that maybe you might not have realized that our cameras can do. Maybe you did realize that they can do some of them, but maybe not, to what extent the various capabilities are. As we move through, and then I'm working on scheduling either next week or the week after, maybe having Matt Fraser on the stream, so we can dive into maybe some of the anamorphic functionality and the higher level video recording functionalities with the camera. So for today's particular stream, we're going to be focusing on storage and resolutions within the camera and how they can interplay with each other, with some recommendations from our side. And we're going to be using my GH7 to go through this. However, I will call out where certain things may not be available on all of the other cameras, because like we know, each of the various different cameras have different capabilities for recording. So like a lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about on with the GH7 will be relevant to cameras like the S9 here, will be relevant to cameras like the S5 Mark II and the Mark IIX, but not every camera always has all the capabilities. So I will try to call that out everywhere that I can. And yeah, we're going to kind of go through that. If you have questions during the broadcast today, make sure to tag at LUMIX USA, as you can see many people are doing, and we'll work through getting those kinds of answers. For a heads up, I believe next week we're probably going to be talking about audio and XLR2, XLR1, the differences, things like that. So if you have questions about audio, I'm going to hold those for next week so that we can go through and answer some of those. I didn't have enough time to prep the audio side of the conversation to start this week's broadcast for it. So, yeah, with that, before we jump any further into this, I want to remind everybody in the United States about LUMIX Pro Services US. We have the Red tier, which is the free program for you to get yourself signed up for if you've just purchased the LUMIX camera. This applies to new LUMIX camera purchases or new current purchases. That's going to get you your 3-year extended manufacturer warranty. It also gets you set into the program, so should you have any problems or any concerns, you're in the portal, you're ready to go, and you can get your camera taken care of. If you're a working professional or someone who prefers to just have a higher level of service and support, that's where you can take a look at the Platinum level service. The Platinum level service is going to get you your 3-year manufacturer warranty, so you're going to get that. But you're also going to get some added benefits there. You're going to get 2-day repairs with next-day shipping both ways. You're going to get 20% off out-of-warranty repairs, so something drops, breaks, things like that. You also get access to the membership hotline, so Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. You have access on the East Coast time for that. And you get the ability to have your camera sent in for annual sensor cleanings, lens calibrations, firmware updates, all that kind of maintenance stuff that maybe you may not want to handle, you may want to have us handle. So I encourage you, if you're in the US, follow the QR code, get yourself registered for it. If you are not joining us from the US, we do have available versions of this throughout various different regions in the world. We have a link down in the description for that, so I encourage you to take a look at those links. Get yourself signed up on those programs if you're not already. Cool. So with that, let's kind of jump in and take a look at some of the questions that have come through here, and yeah, we'll dive into it. So RW is asking, I know this isn't tagged at LUMIX USA, but I did see it. How come on S&Q the LUMIX S5 II doesn't have 25 or 50 in S&Q mode? Also, the MC21 doesn't get autofocus in S&Q, which is really unfortunate. Only get AF with native lenses. Can this be updated? So for slow and quick mode, one of the things that I have to remember, and I do have my S5 IIX here. Come on. Thank you. I meant to check this before, because I believe with the slow and quick mode on the S5 II and the S5 IIX, the way, so if you're trying to get 25 and 50 frames per second, I believe, and let me just double check this, because I don't really use slow and quick mode that often, honestly. The S5 II and the 2X have the ability to change system frequency. So that's where you can go from NTSC to PAL to 24 Hertz. And in order to get slow and quick at 25 or 50p as your output for your resolution, you have to go into the camera's menu. And actually, I can show this on my GH7. So in order to get slow and quick for that, now the GH7 doesn't have this. This has variable frame rate, so slightly different. You have to go into the settings menu. You have to scroll down to the system frequency, and you have to change this to PAL. When you change this to PAL, what that's going to do is it's going to update the rec quality functions here. So right now you can see I'm in NTSC, so I have 30, 60, 24, 120, the normal frame rates that you would see in an NTSC power region or frequency region. Once you switch that over to PAL, it changes all those to 25 and 50. So if you're not seeing it, that's what you have to do. Now, as far as autofocus goes in slow and quick, it's going to depend on the camera that you're using for what modes have the ability for autofocus, which ones don't. When you go to some of the other cameras, like faster cameras like the GH7, you have some extended functionality there. And a lot of that comes down to the sensor readout speed, what's possible there, what AF technology is being used between the various different modes. The phase hybrid autofocusing system that we use within the LUMIX cameras is designed where it will intelligently pick what is the best autofocus mode and what is available to be used based on what you have your camera set up for. So in that particular case, I have to double check. I believe it's going to depend on what the frame rate is that you're recording at for the slow and quick mode to determine whether or not you have autofocus. Like I said, I don't use autofocus, or I don't use slow and quick all that often. Primarily because I just don't. I prefer to record in the resolution that, or the resolution in native frame rate that I'm going to be outputting in. So if I have to do higher speed filming, I do it with the GH7 and I just do 120 frames per second and record it there and then slow it down in the computer. In which case everything works there. So yeah, I kind of hope that works. The follow-up part of your question is how come you can't record to SD cards in slow and quick, except if you use SSDs? Even my S5 II can do that. So one of the biggest things to notice about the difference between slow and quick and variable frame rate in various different camera offerings with the newer ones is that in the older cameras, like the original GH5 and some of the others, typically your variable frame rate or your slow and quick options were 8-bit options. So that meant that it was a much lower performance. They were lower bitrate options. You could still record in Vlog with them and still get a great image out of them. But because they were lower bitrate, you could do them to standard media. You can do them to SD cards, which was the standard then. When you go to the newer cameras, a number of the higher bitrate options have been updated. So now a lot of them are 10-bit. And a lot of them have higher bit rate in general. So couple parts. One's it's gonna give you a much better looking slow and quick file versus those that are using 8-bit. So you have more grading flexibility. You have higher bit rates, which is going to give you better looking footage because as you're over or under cranking the sensor, more of that bit rate is devoted to the individual frames that are being used for over and under crank. And it just depends on what your system is. When you look through our camera menu options here, This is where understanding what the information is when you are looking at the various resolutions and combinations becomes very important. So right now, like we're looking at my GH7. I have the camera set in 5.7K 30p in ProRes right now. And what you'll see on the left-hand side of that is it'll tell you what mode. So ProRes, or Apple ProRes, full, that means it's using the full area of the sensor. Gives you the aspect ratio, the resolution, actual count of that, the frame rate, in this case 2997. It tells you which version of ProRes you're using. So in this case, it's 422. I'm using linear PCM audio. But underneath that is where the information becomes important. So 1.3 gigabit. One, you know that's a really high data throughput. So right there, SD cards are not going to work. In fact, they're not compatible in this particular mode. If you try to record with the camera, it's going to tell you can't record to this media type. When you go underneath that, that's where you're going to see the various different options as to is variable or is slow and quick available, is hybrid log gamma available, so on and so forth. But on the bottom, recordable slot. This is the indicator to tell you what media you have to use for that particular mode. So in this case, you have 1, which is CF Express, and 2, which is SSD. Or in this case, just square with SSD in it. When you're in a low enough resolution option, that's where you'll see it will change and you'll be able to do different options here. So if I take it out of ProRes, you'll see here I've got 1 for CF Express, 2 for SD, and the SSD option shown next to it. The modes that are set up, the combination of resolution, the combination of frame rate, and the combination of bit rate are what determine whether or not you can go to certain media types. So keep that in mind as you're kind of looking through, you know, why, like, I want to shoot this, but I want to record to X media. The camera's telling you what it can do. And it's done through combination of factors. What is going to be the most reliable? What can technically handle it? There's a lot of conversation about, well, SD cards have X number rating on them and they should be technically available to do, you know, so-and-so. It doesn't work like that. The numbers that you see on the cards themselves are based on one standard. What the camera's actually recording are based on what the kind of spec states. So if a card is too close to the barrier of where technically maybe it could do it, but not at a sustained rate, it's not going to be able to do it on the camera. And we have safeguards built into place so that you don't run into situations like that. So, but those are good questions. So to recap, RW, the reason why the card change and requirements for slow and quick versus GH5 is that the whole entire slow and quick mode system on these modern cameras are totally different than what they were on the older cameras. They're much more demanding. Let's see here. Klaus, I will address your question on the XLR adapter next week. I have to do a little bit more work with the XLR2 to prep for that, to be able to answer your question about the noise floor. Broadly, from what I've been told by people using it, the noise floor is much lower. The preamps are nicer than what were used in the original XLR1. And that added benefit of 32-bit float is a major boon for those using the GH7. Where do you go? AF on and on. S1H is the first camera that implemented a tiltable flip-out screen way earlier than other brands. I hope it can be introduced to more product lines and also be able to tilt down. Yeah, I would love to see that screen. I think if you look at the evolution of what we've done with that screen type over the years, it's gotten better and better, and it's getting smaller and smaller. I just honestly don't think people realize how big that the mechanisms are to be able to do that and have it as a rigid, reliable tool. Because I know I would have loved to seen it on the S9, but if I had to add that much extra space on the back, it would have been a no-go for me. Because at that point, then everyone would start to go off about how thick the camera is at that point. Let's see here. I think it's D or Die. We don't answer those questions on the stream. Macari, hey Sean, yay, another stream. Thanks again for doing these. Wait, where's Matt? Working on getting him in the next 2 weeks. Let's see here. Ken says, bugs on GH7. Hopefully Panasonic will fix a firmware update. Eye detection autofocus on human doesn't work. 2 glitches when setting my photo style where you import LUTs to reset to DEFA. I use the Sync app to monitor myself, but it disconnects around 7 to 10 meters away. GH5 with the Panasonic LUMIX app did better. So Ken, more information than eye detection autofocus on human doesn't work is usually required to be able to address something like that. I can point out a slew of other users out there that aren't having problems with it. So unless I can get information as to your use case, I don't have any ability to report anything there at that point. Same when it comes to glitches. What are the glitches? Just saying that it glitches or just saying that it doesn't work isn't feedback. You got to have some sort of detail or explanation behind what you're saying for anyone to be able to action on anything or check into it and see what's going on. But if you have that information, please put it in the chat, or better yet, in the comment after, so that we can track it and take a look at it. Let's see here. FC. What's the difference in battery life between turning the camera switch off versus letting it sit and go to sleep? Ignore 1 minute timeout for sleep mode. So, we'll talk about that in a little bit, FC. Doctor. Just got a couple RE log codes. Just realized not available in recording raw over HDMI. Is that a possibility? How do you use Arilog on the GH6? Thank you. So yes, Arilog is not something for raw video. I think it's a fundamental, maybe slight misunderstanding about raw video. Our raw video, raw is raw. ProRes raw is ProRes raw. You can make it into whatever color space you want, because of how you interpret that footage when you get it into your editing software. On the camera, cameras have a color space assigned to it so that you can even do anything with it. Otherwise, you're not actually looking at an image. You have to look at some sort of image to process and then base your exposures off of. Our RAW is based on Vlog vGamut. When you look at, okay, I want to be able to apply a LUT on the camera, I want to work with this quickly. When I throw it into software, I can have it recognize as Vlog vGamut, but you could very easily just take it and have it recognize as ARRI log and then grade it like ARRI log. So it's more about the reference for it. The ARRI log C3, when you're going to be doing things on like the GH7, the GH6, those are going to be to the MOV codecs, ProRes, non-RAW, and you have that general ability. The ARRI LUT on the GH6 should be there when you have the camera set to ARRI log C3 for the color profile, and then you can apply it for the LUT preview. It should be a default in there. And again, I don't have my GH6. It has been out on a long-term loan, so I haven't been able to actually work with it on the GH6, but I've been told it's the same as how it's implemented on the GH7. So, let's see here. Is there any difference between Slow and Quick and VFR? I thought VFR was just renamed to Slow and Quick, but now the GH7 has VFR. Again, for example, yes. So VFR, when we talk about the various resolution and frame rate options that you have on the LUMIX cameras, VFR and Slow and Quick, the difference is at a general perspective. Slow and Quick, an actual S&Q mode, will be on cameras that are typically lower tier, and by lower tier I just mean non-GH cameras. Variable frame rate, so VFR, is a function that was originally released, if I have my history correct, was originally released within our system on the Vericam. And that was the ability to more fine-tune control, change your shutter, overcrank and undercrank your sensor for a given output and resolution. It's one of the ways you got like things like 24 frame, 30 frame, 60 frame, the way you're able to do those things. So being able to do those different changes to your frame rate based on the resolution that you're working in, when you look at a much higher end product like GH for its designed purpose, more finite control is typically required within those categories. When you go to other cameras like the S5 Mark II, the Mark IIX, which are not our top tier professional cameras, a lot of people need to keep that in mind. Those cameras have slow and quick. Slow and quick is a more simplified way to do the same thing. If you look at a lot of these cameras, when you go into SNQ mode, you'll notice that the interface is a bit different. You're selecting your resolution based on the fact that it grays out options that aren't available for slow and quick. So at step one, it's easier to get into slow to your pre-slowed down or time-lapsed video output file. So you'll already know which ones can do it. Then you have the option down below of that, which is, well, what resolution or what frame rate do you want to be recording it at within that frame rate? So it's a reorganization of how those different pieces work. Technically, VFR is a more powerful tool because you'll have more control. If you look at the cameras that do deploy VFR versus slow and quick, VFR tends to have more steps of available frame rate options. So when you look at the fact that like VFR on this camera, you can go all the way up to 300 frames per second. I know you can do that on the G9 Mark II. That's kind of the weird crossover point with it. Micro Four Thirds allows you to just go a lot faster than the full frame sensors. But it's all about how it's displayed. In practical terms, so if you are jumping between various different cameras, you really don't have to worry about much between them anymore. Realistically, the differences are going to be down to very minute kind of fringe use cases. Whether your camera says it has slow and quick or it says it has variable frame rate, it'll come down more in practical side to how you access that mode, how you filter out for it, and not so much down to quality between the two. That's probably the easiest way to describe it. Let's see here. McCary, could you comment on Sean O'Neill's question, and perhaps if AF could work with 240 FPS? Sean O'Neill's, O'Neill's. Any firmware updates coming to the G9 Mark II? Autofocus at HD 300 FPS, increased subject detection. We don't comment on future requests or potential firmware updates, things like that. We just never have. So I don't have anything I can address on that. Other than the only thing I could say is that the 300 frames per second, or where when you go into the if we're in the slow and quick options here, right? Or in this case, I'm in variable frame rate, right? If we go in here and say I turn variable frame rate on, and let's go to where I can actually go all the way up. Is this gonna break my switch? No, it doesn't. Hooray. Okay, so if we go into variable frame rate, and again, you'll see here right on that screen, VFR available means that I can do VFR. So let's change this here. Let's do variable frame rate on. As you look here and you kind of go up in through the various different settings here, this is where it's going to tell you the general changes that you're going to see here. So on the GH7, you'll notice that automatically this just drops it right into manual focus at 300 FPS. If I come in here and we change this down to 240, we're still, if I come back in and I change this down to, I think it's 120. Nope. So you see the differences there. VFR, you have no autofocusing for VFR. Depending on the camera that you're in, this is where it's going to kind of depend on what you need to do with it. So in this case, we'll see like, hey, if I'm at 24 frame and I'm trying to do 120 frames per second recording because I want to be able to do a 20% slowdown, you notice that I don't have autofocus here. However, if I come in and I change this camera to 120 frames per second in full frame, so let's do this one. I think the switch will be okay with this. Yeah. I have autofocus again. Even further than that, like, because the other question there about 240 FPS. So if I go to 240 FPS, you'll see I still can do autofocus. The difference is that the autofocus, when you're going to be doing this, and do I have enough light to do this? This is the problem showing high frame rate work, is you need a heck of a lot more light. So let me see if I can flood some more light in on this. Maybe this will let me do it. So what you'll notice here is that, and I am wide enough to be able to do this. What you'll notice here is that in the 240 FPS, I don't have continuous autofocus, but I have the push AF. So I can hit the rear AF button and I can refocus. I can hit the rear AF button and I can refocus. That's going to be the difference when you're looking at 240 FPS. Now, if I go down back to 120 FPS, you'll see that the AF box changed as well. So I have more AF options here, where the 240 has to go to one area. This can do one area plus, zone, so on and so forth. But I do have continuous autofocus in 120. So if you need autofocus with the higher frame rate, or you need some autofocus in 240, 240, you got to do the single AF. With 240 FPS with AF is for the GH7. Yep, because we're demoing on the GH7. Could the G9 Mark II handle it, or is it tech limited? So a lot of the things that you'll see when it comes to video use on a camera like the G9 Mark II, that camera is not designed video forward. And we've said this from day one. That camera is designed photography forward. So that means that, when we talk about the thermal management side of the cameras, if you're someone who needs 240 FPS and you need some autofocus, if you need the higher end video recording functionality, if you want the CF Express, if you want the thermal management to be able to record with the camera and not have to worry about the camera shutting off because of heat, that's what GH cameras are for. That's what they've always been. The G series is not that camera. Would it be able to do it? Probably not. Realistically, the stuff like that, the higher frame rate you go with running autofocus, with the various different storage methods, all generate heat. And within our cameras, we have to rate them within a very specific rating for what the reliability is. And that's our standard that we stick to. So when you look at the G9 Mark II, it has thermal limitations, but we rate our cameras at 104 degrees Fahrenheit. So those are very high standards to measure by. But if things like 240 FPS would generate too much heat with autofocus running and everything there, then it's not going to get it. And it's probably not going to be a firmware update thing that would ever come to that camera either. Because again, remember, G9 Mark II is not a video first camera. Yes, it has a bunch of video features, and we do that on purpose because we believe in the democratization of video functionality to the industry. You shouldn't be locked out of certain video features just because, technically your camera is not marketed to it. What you will find is more of the kind of specialized video functionality where you won't be able to do certain things because they're specialty or they're more niche than what the general everyday kind of users gonna have the ability to use, or not have the ability, have the means to use. So All right, let me put my camera back into 30 FPS so I can do this right. Make sure I set this up right. Cool, I did. There we go. All right, so I want to talk about storage on these cameras for video use cases. So I have a couple different options here in storage. I couldn't get them all to stand up right, but some of the stuff that you'll see here on the screen, these are general storage options that you would find in a lot of our much higher level cameras. So the GH7, the GH6, and then even if you go back to the S1R, the S1, CF Express, or what used to be called XQD, are the larger kind of formatted media. And ironically, I actually do have an XQD card here, which is a bit of a surprise. And I'm going to leave that one out for a specific reason, because people got to kind of understand media here. CF Express has been a media type that we've been using in cameras for quite some time now, and we are using what's called the Type B format. So Type B is in Bravo. Things that you'll notice here with them next to an SD card is, one, they're slightly bigger, they're thicker, and they're honestly a lot more robust than an SD card is. And with that, you're going to get a number of extra benefits with it. Usually you get a lot faster throughput speeds with those particular cards. You also typically, need to have some sort of reader to truly take benefit of those speeds. But you also see that the sizes are typically starting to change up what you see as far as the actual storage capacity within those cards, right? So we see here, so what we see here is I have a good mix of CF Express cards that I use across the board on my cameras. I have a Angelbird 1 terabyte CF Express B. This is a 1785 megabyte per second card. I have a Nextgear, Next Storage, which is a recent addition to the kit here. This is a 330 gigabyte, and then I have a Sandisk Pro Cinema 640 gigabyte. There is also a 320 gigabyte option as well, and those cards are actually, basically all three of these cards are the ones that I've been relying on for a while now. I only recently got my hands on these particular cards here, but I've used these brands for quite a while. I've known of the Next Storage. That's actually probably the newest one that's in addition to the kit here. And the reason I'm talking about these in particular, not the Angelbird just yet, but the Sandisk and the Next Storage, these are memory cards that are included on our validated media list. What the validated media list is a set of cards and sizes and specs that we have tested and validated within our cameras to function at the rated speeds that our camera requires to actually function. So what that means is, if you are ever out there asking a question like, hey, what card should I get for my camera? I want a card that's going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. We publish these lists. They are down in the description below for the modern cameras. And what you'll see on the GH7 list, which I think I've got this set up. Yeah, I do. So what you'll see here is on the GH7 list, this is one of the links down in the description, you'll see that we have SD card ratings here, and you'll see the F2 Pro, F2 SE cards, which if we go back to the cards here, you'll see that I have the Next Storage SD card right there. These are V90 memory cards. And you've got options here. We give the part number for it, the capacity of that card, and the V rating spec. One of the things you'll notice is that within the specifications that we give here, especially in a camera like the GH7, the specs are given based on what the maximum capability for that card's recordable functions within the camera are requiring. You are going to see people online say left, up, left, right, up, and down. U3 cards are fine for the vast majority of stuff that you do. Or V60 cards are perfectly fine. Or I've used V60 cards and I've never had a problem. So that's great for that individual. But if you are looking to actually work within specification and actually know, like, hey, the card that I'm using has been tested in this camera and it works, and the card manufacturer is a reputable card manufacturer that's supporting it, and the manufacturer, us, we've tested it, and we've tested to know that within reason the cards are working perfectly fine. And I say within reason because you can get a bum card. It happens. It's just what happens in the memory industry. You'll know that the card that you get is going to be able to do what the camera says it can do. Now, for SD cards, one of the important things to understand across any of our cameras is that SD cards can be used for any resolution and frame rate combination that is up to 600 megabit per second. So that is your 400 megabit options, that's your 200 megabit options, all the way up to 600 megabit. As we mentioned before, the cameras have a little kind of key within the operating menu here that says what recordable media slot is able to be used on the camera. So in this case, 1, 2, and 3, CF Express, SD, and SSD. Then it gives you what's your megabit per second, the 150 megabit per second here. Remember, little b. So the other thing that's confusing is there's MB with a big B, MB with a little b. They are different numbers. Don't try to not mistake them together. But what you'll notice here is if I go up to the L and H options, we have two new high bitrate options within the modern cameras. In this case, GH6, GH7. You have a low, which is that 600 megabit per second, and you'll see that I can do 1, 2, and 3, so I can record to any of the media types. But if I go to H, at 800 megabits, it's CF Express and SSD. So you'll want to know, as you're looking through this, what are the recording modes that you're going to be using? What are the bit rates that you want to be working at? Because we can go all the way up to ridiculously high bit rate options for raw video recording, this becomes more critical now than ever. So yeah, SD cards, you do that. Anything you want to do over 600, as we just showed, CF Express and SSDs. But if you want to know what SSDs or what CF Express cards to use, this is where you take a look at, you just keep scrolling down to the CF Express cards that we have validated within the cameras. You'll see a number of the main brand players that most of us are probably known, or that is known to most of us. But what you'll see here is within the GH7, there is added layers of compatibility for CF Express. So let's just take a look at one here, because a couple of them you'll see that there are certain cases where the cards might not 100% work for various different options. So you'll see if we look at the Pro Cinema cards from Sandisk, this is the card that I have right here. So that is the Pro Cinema, take that off. That is the Pro Cinema card right here. So if we're looking at this card, you'll see that the 320 gigabyte and the 640 gigabyte are validated across the board. That means that they work for stills, clearly. They work for all bit rates within video, which includes at least the 1.9 gigabit. Now, the 1.9 gigabit option that you see here in this column, this is referencing the highest ProRes option that you have within the GH7. If you're on a GH6 user, the 1.9 gigabit is the highest that you have for ProRes recording. That's 422 or 422 HQ. But you'll see that there are a lot of cards that can do up to the 1.9 gigabit. And that's where we start looking, and we've added companies like Next Storage into this. With the B1 Pro and the B2 Pros, you'll see that they're very reliable across the board as far as our testing goes. They just work, and they set into the system here. When we go to Sandisk, you'll see that for the most part, The cards all seem to work fairly well across the board for the up to 1.9 gigabit. There are some asterisks here. So asterisk number one on this particular case is that these are potentially susceptible to more thermal challenge. CF Express cards, if you've never used them before, are very hot or can get very hot. So it kind of depends on the generation card that you're working with. And to be clear, the Extreme Pro Type B CF Express cards that we look at here, these are typically some of the older cards. These are the older generation. If you're looking at Sandisk as a card manufacturer that you want to buy in with your camera, I highly recommend you taking a look at the Pro Cinema line, because we've done the testing here. We see that pretty much across the board, as long as you're 320 gig and higher, they're going to work with everything that you want to throw at it from the camera. If you're doing a 256 gig, you'll see that the all bit rates, which is going to be the raw recording functionality on the GH7, it says no. But in reality, you're probably not going to use a 256 gig if you're going to be recording raw, just because of sheer file size at that point. But you can do the up to 1.9. You just have to maybe be a little more aware that those cards are going to get hotter, and that could potentially slow down, because the hotter a card gets, the slower the speed is that it writes. And then when we look at the last setup here as far as storage goes, you look at SSDs. Now, not every camera is going to have support for SSDs. S52X, GH6, GH7, they support SSD recording. You'll see that we've, on this case as well, when it comes to the GH7, we've updated the validation list again here as well. You'll see that the T5s, which on the GH6 have been perfectly fine for things like ProRes, all the way up to 1.9 gigabit, are not recommended for the raw recording functionality or anything over 1.9 gigabit. You start to run into speed challenges here. When we start looking at the T7 shields, you see again, yes, T7 shields have been run and tested, so have the T9s. They've been tested to go through and validate what works, what size, capacity, all that combination is available there. But again, you have some asterisks. Typically, an asterisk 1 here just means make sure you're up to date on the most current firmware from that manufacturer. The T7 Shield and the realistically just the T7 Shield. If that is a storage device that you're going to go with, update the firmware, run their software, make sure that it's current. Excuse me. Because there were some changes there that added compatibility. If you've just got one out of the box, you plug it in, you format it, you go to use it, and you're wondering, it keeps telling me that it's too slow or it can't work or something along those lines, it's probably down to the firmware. Less likely there could be potentially something wrong with the device itself. Most important when it comes to the SSDs is making sure that you're using the proper cables with them, but we'll talk about that in a second. We go further down into the Sandisk drives. This is where we have the ProBlade system, which is, again, one of my favorite SSD options for the camera. I have the Condor Blue ProBlade SSD handle right here. The SSD system plugs right into a mag system right on the grip itself, and then lets you plug it right into the camera to get you your speeds that you need. Now, I mentioned the cabling for SSDs. And I mention this because I've seen a number of comments and questions popping up on like Reddit forums and various different groups. You get it, you wonder why, it stops recording. The drive that you're using that you bought, if you follow all the directions here and you picked up the right drive, say you've got the ProBlade and you've done everything right, but it's still not working. Or it records and then it stops recording. The first number one thing to check is the cable that you are using. I have seen more often than not people that will take, and this is an exaggeration here, people will take cables like this. This is a charging cable. Looks just like a standard USB-C cable, because technically it is. This is actually one that I have from my Peak Design wireless charger. However, these are not data cables. You can buy these cheap. You can buy them online for really inexpensive that are designed to be able to throughput, the power needed for charging your phone or even charging your camera, because the cameras can take 9-volt 3 amp. However, you'll notice quickly that those cables are flaky when it comes to doing anything data transfer, because most of the time they're still USB 2.0 speed rated. They don't have to be rated for fast throughput. Instead, you want to look for, and we'll see if this is even readable in this because I don't have a macro lens up here. But what you'll see is a cable like this. This is the cable that came with my Next Storage CF Express reader. This is a 40 gigabit rated cable that's designed to work with their CF Express reader. So this allows me to take full advantage of the 40 gigabit or USB 4 pipeline. That when I use this, if I'm going to plug in and work over USB, is more than enough for being able to accommodate the SSDs that I want to use on the devices. And the reason for that is that the USB-C port on the cameras from LUMIX, these are USB-C 10 gigabit ports. So making sure that your cable can support USB 10 gigabit at minimum is where you want to make sure that you've got that chain kind of locked up for your data storage. Depending on the camera that you're working with is where, if you're even going to be using SSDs, none of this may matter to you. But we talk about the other side of this with media storage. So if we go back to the camera quickly here, we start looking at the various different recording options, right? So if I'm going to go out on an entire day of filming, right? I'm going out to capture all day, and say I'm going to be recording in ProRes because ProRes is a bit easier for me to work with. My machine has no problem working with it. Even if I'm doing ProRes RAW, it's got no issues with it. I can just record and record and record. However, you start noticing that these bit rates are getting way up there. So we start looking at the highest non-RAW recording option is up to 1.9 gigabit. Now, if I am to take a CF Express card, and I'm going to throw a 1 terabyte in here so that everybody can see what happens storage-wise. Let this initialize quickly. Let's go down. We're going to freshly format this card within the camera. And we're going to do a low-level format on the CF Express card because I want it fully reset here. What you're going to see is how much the bit rates adjust your storage capacity. These are questions that I see come up a lot online as to how big of a card do I need for the various different resolutions that I'm going to be recording in. So let's start way at the top here. So if we are in ProRes and I go all the way up to the highest quality that's available. This is 5.7K 30p ProRes RAW HQ in 4.2 gigabit. Now the nice thing is I can output and actually show you, so you can actually follow along. Now if I look at it, you'll see that a 1 terabyte CF Express card is getting me 21 minutes and 48 seconds roughly. This is like the safe number. That number typically will be a little bit higher than that because this is based on what's just initially present showing, size of card. So you'll know, okay, 1 terabyte, 21 minutes, 48 seconds. It's not a lot of time. Even if I go down a bit here, if I go down to the non-HQ variant, I'm up to 32 minutes. I'm getting there. If I want to go down into the let's go into 24 frames per second. Why did that disconnect? Yep, I should be back now. Okay. If I go down back into 24 frames per second RAW. Now this is going to swap out because it's got to change frame rates here. Now I'm up at 41 minutes. So knowing how much storage you need and knowing what frame rate and bit rates you're going to be recording at can become incredibly important for your particular, style of shooting. Know that if you want to take advantage of RAW recording formats here, it's gonna take a lot of large storage. This is where you're gonna be looking at 1 to potentially 2 terabyte CF Express cards, or jumping to an external SSD, because the cost per terabyte or per gigabyte is going to be much lower when you go to an SSD. But if I drop out of ProRes RAW here, let's go into standard ProRes. Let's do down to the 1 gigabyte. 1 gigabyte, now I'm getting 2 hours of recording. So know what frame rate and resolution combination you want to be working with when you start looking at what capacity to go with. Understand that 1 terabyte CF Express cards, especially when you're looking at ones that are validated, that we know are going to run right on the resolution and frame rate combination that you're going to be working with, they're going to be much more expensive. That's where you can make that decision yourself to say, do I want it fully enclosed within the camera, or am I okay with an external SSD? Am I going to use something like the Condor Blue handle with the ProBlade system in here to get my 2 terabytes, because that'll be overall, even with the grip, typically cheaper than a single CF Express card at that 2 terabyte. There are different options that you want to keep at play for the storage there. When you go into just basically standard recording, or what I would consider standard recording, so MOV options here, this is where you're going to see that it gets kind of ridiculous with a 1 terabyte. So I'm right here at 150 megabit per second, C4K 30, which is what a lot of times I'll have the camera in, and I got 14 hours of recording. So as long as I can feed this camera battery and not have it exceed much over the 104 degrees Fahrenheit that we test the cameras at, I'm just going to be able to keep recording and recording and recording, and that's what our cameras are designed to do. This is also where your benefit of how much of this storage you're going to be doing. You'll notice that, again, when we're talking about these much higher end file sizes. So if I come in, we set it back to that ProRes option, and we go to, probably the common ProRes option that I'll record at, which is usually going to be 30p. 1.9 gigabit. As we said here, I've got 1 hour and 11 minutes to record in ProRes RAW. Nope, that's ProRes. ProRes. I have an hour and 11 minutes to record. So if I'm going to be doing a long talking head, say I want to record this particular broadcast in ProRes as a backup if this camera was running the entire time. Well, that means now that I have to take a 1 terabyte file, which will be split up into slightly smaller file sizes, I believe. I forget what the cap is on it, and that's a file size limitation, although it might be fine on the 1 terabyte. I know that was one of Cliff's questions from last week or the week before, and I still haven't been able to sit down and actually run one long enough to test. But I have gotten 600 gigs out of one file on this camera in this mode. So if I'm recording, I now have to also think about, well, I have to offload this footage. I got to be able to take this, then get it onto my system to start editing. And this is not even accounting things like Frame.io and being able to do camera to cloud with proxies, that kind of thing. I need to get the raw footage from this camera onto my computer. If I am recording in regular old MOV and I'm doing 150 megabit and say I do an entire day's worth of it and I filled up, a 512 gig SD card. If I'm using a low speed V60, V30 card, because let's face it, 150 megabit per second, yeah, V30 is probably going to be fine, but it's not what our recommendation is. We don't recommend it. If you are someone that's using those cards, you'll probably commiserate with a lot of people where you take those cards out, you plug them in the computer, and then you go do something else while it offloads that card. Because the readers are only going to go as fast as the cards are pretty much designed to go. And if you spend inexpensive on a memory card, your offload speeds become much longer. Where if you're doing CF Express and you're using something like a 40 gigabit or a 20 gigabit, USB reader for these, now you're actually taking full advantage to where I can offload that 600 gig file on this particular reader over the 40 gig connection, which is a USB 4 or Thunderbolt 4, in like 15 seconds, and it's off. So knowing the resolution combination, knowing the size of the card that you want to work with, can help determine which of the storage options you want to go with on your particular camera. Now, if we spin this to a totally non-professional side of the conversation, my S9 here, this is still my go-to everyday walk-around camera that pretty much goes with me every single place that I go. This camera, even though it does not have the highest video recording functionality, it does not need the highest functionality cards out there, period. If I'm going to be recording video, I'm doing MP4 Lite, which is a much lighter weight open gate recording function. And it's much easier to work with across the board because I'm probably going to be sending this stuff to my phone. The card that I use in this camera is this ProGrade card. I use a V90 ProGrade card in this particular camera because that's what works best for the entire general workflow that I'm using. So when I'm done for the day, I can take this, throw it in my MacBook, I can throw it onto my desktop PC here. Files are offloaded super quick, and I'm done. Does the camera require it? No. Is it recommended? Yeah, we still do recommend, even in the S9, we recommend that you're using V60, V90. Those V ratings on the cards, especially with the reliable manufacturers that we work with and we validate within our cameras, are also proving that they are stable, that when they put a rating on that card, it's going to work. So you know that it's not going to be some knockoff card that they claim one thing, but then you get it and it just doesn't want to work. So yeah, that's kind of the general of media when it comes to working with the various cameras. If you're on a G100, what's nice about the G100 is that you don't necessarily need V90. In fact, I don't even think on the G100 we're formally recommending V90. The bit rates, the stills capture side of it, the lower throughput that's required, you can do V30s, you can do V60. I typically still even recommend V60 across the board. Costs of V60s have gotten relatively low as it sits. On the higher end cameras, GH7, GH6, even on my S1R that I use, that I still use because it's my full spectrum converted camera. Even on that camera, I still use CF Express as the primary. Do I need it for anything that's inside the camera for recording? No, but I use it because I'd rather be not spending time offloading footage. And the last thing I wanted to just kind of mention, because, man, the hour went by fast. Last thing I want to mention is a little bit of a warning for those out there that are just getting into this stuff and looking at CF Express. Because I've seen a rash of these things starting to show up on... I've seen a rash of them showing up on various selling websites. I don't want to call anyone in particular out because it's not necessarily the selling company's website. It's resellers and things that you see online. These two cards look identical. They have the exact same form factor. They fit in the exact same slots. They, depending on the camera that you're using, can even be used interchangeably. However, if you are on some of the newest cameras out there, like our GH7, you cannot use this particular card. If you put this into the camera, it's actually going to tell you, can't use this card. This is what was called an XQD card. This was the precursor to CF Express. So as you are looking for media, again, this is why looking at what we have, setting as the rated cards. It's why we have one of the reasons why we have this list published. You don't want to go out there, get the particular, card because maybe you see there's a bulk of these and you can get them really inexpensive. You don't want to buy that, put it in the camera only to find out like, hey, this doesn't work, and it just doesn't work at all. So make sure you're looking at CF Express Type B. Type B is what we use. Type A is the alternate version of CF Express. It's actually substantially slower than CF Express Type B. So you typically can't do things like RAW to the cards on them, at least in like ProRes RAW like what we've got. So yeah, just keep those in mind when you're looking at various media options. And when you're looking at the various resolutions that you can work with on the cameras, again, use what the camera's telling you. Excuse me, on the screen here for what media cards you're able to use within the particular mode there. Again, just as that refresher, if I'm in MOV and I go in, tells me exactly which cards I can use. 1, 2, or SSD. 1 being CF Express, 2 being SD card, and then the square being SSD. If your camera only has dual SD cards, you'll, like if you're on an S5 IIX, that camera is going to actually prompt you and show you the pretty much the same screen, but what you're going to see is the SD card there, so slot 1, slot 2, and then you'll have the SSD. You won't have the kind of rectangle for the CF Express since the camera doesn't support CF Express. Yeah, so keep those in mind. The other option with recordable media on the cameras is, depending on if your camera has Frame IO functionality, will determine if you have proxy recording capabilities. So you'll see here in this case, my C4K 30p, I can record proxy, which means when I go into the proxy settings, I pick which one I want here. These are all lighter weight options, so 4, 6, and 12 megabit per second. Nice and low throughput for a solid 10-bit 1080p proxy file. But you will always have to have a card in slot 2. So if I wanted to do proxies, make sure that on a GH7 that you have an SD card inserted and that your CF Express card is also inserted. If you are someone using an SSD, so external storage, you still have to make sure that an SD card is plugged into slot 2 for proxy recording, because you can do proxies even though you're recording to your external SSD storage as your main storage slot. Let's hear. There were a couple other questions that just dropped in quickly here. Makes sense. Typically take G9 II for fun photography and wildlife. Slow motion gets used. S5 II are being used for pro indoor video work. Yep. For tests, is there a form to report bugs on LUMIX? On my S9, I set film grain on my photo style, then set that photo style to custom 2. When I switch out of C2, like if I switch from M to C2. For tests, I've had a couple people request this one, and I have presented it over to the engineers to take a look at it. So that one's already kind of being checked in on to see if there's any kind of issue with the C1 with the saving of the color profiles to the custom settings there. I don't have an update just yet, but you can always just leave that comment down in the comment field after the video is published. Since you attend worldwide events, any good recommendations for cloud storage that works worldwide, including Asia, China, and Japan, and North America? Cloud storage. 90% of my cloud storage, well, actually, it's not 90% anymore. I use a mix, honestly, because it depends on what I'm doing. If it's for professional work, I use Frame IO. I've actually just completely swapped everything over to Frame IO for collaborative work that way. If it's photography based, I use Frame IO, and then now that, like we talked about on the photography stream, the workflow broadcast, I'll use Frame IO there, and then I have it automatically connected to my Lightroom catalog, so when it gets up to frame, it's then syncing over to Lightroom, so I have the cloud service support with Adobe. I know some people may not be down for that, and that's personal opinions on, what cloud service you want to use. But I find that for photo, that's probably the most seamless one that I have, because as I'm capturing, if I'm using Frame, if I am done for the day and I, get back to the hotel and I want to upload images, I just take them and I just upload them right into my frame catalog, because I can do it either through the camera. So if I have a good enough network connection, I'll do it live while I'm shooting with the camera. I'll have those files going up. If I don't have a good network connection, then when I get back to the hotel room, I just pop the card, put it in a reader, and then just upload them into Frame, because then it auto-populates over into my Lightroom catalog. For video, video is a bit different for me. I don't do cloud storage with video. Storage of video projects for me is all strictly done on Sandisk ProBlade solution. I have been fully enamored with that solution before we even started talking with them about, you know, testing compatibility, all that kind of stuff, and, you know, talking about them with the ProBlade handle and all that stuff with Condor. So I have a bunch of ProBlade mags that I use, and that's just where my storage goes. If I need to share or move video files to friends, clients, things like that, I use Frame.io. Otherwise, it's like Google Drive typically, because you can create shared links that people don't have to log into if they don't have a Google account, although I think the vast majority of people have Google accounts these days. And then, yeah, that's kind of how I work with storage there. Let's see here. Hi, thanks for answering my question. FYI, I'm in PAL in S&Q, but the frame rates offered are 1 to 60, but 50 FPS doesn't exist for some reason. Would be handy, so if in the future. Are you talking about RW? Are you talking about in... Come on. Are you talking about... Get into here. Are you talking about in this particular screen part here, that there's no 50 here, or in your actual output frame rate? Because you should be able to select 25 and 50 FPS. I'm in PAL in S&Q, but the frames offered are 1 to 60, but 50 FPS. So, okay, RW, the question I'd have for you there is, if you are in slow and quick, and you want 50 FPS, is it because you're outputting 25 and you're trying to do a 2:1, like a half speed? Or are you trying to put it to 50 so that you can do a 1:1? Because if that's the case, just record in 50. I might not be fully understanding the question there for you. June says, hey Sean, last Saturday I did a wedding with Flash. Last time I've done one was with your A7 IV. My issue was I don't get flash exposure reading on my S5 II constant preview. Lots of pictures I had only one time to nail shot, so an inaccurate exposure is bad. Yeah, I mean, our flash system works the way it does. It works more like how the traditional cameras did. So your constant preview turns off when you're using flash. That's just how the system works. There's not really anything I can say that updates that. I'm using SD 256 gig XC 250 megabyte V62 in two cameras, S5 II and S5 II in dual rec. In stills, it's sometimes stuck after shooting 5 to 6 images, and I did format before. I don't know what brand SD card you're talking about here. Because all you say, unless you're saying SanDisk for SD, 256 gig. So for that particular setup there, so yeah, for that particular setup there, you're on the S5 Mark II. So S5 Mark II with, well, that's GH5 Mark II. Let's go to S5 ProGrade. All right, so S5 Mark II, and you're using the ProGrade V60 cards, and you said you're using the 256 gig, which is going to be the gold cards. So the first thing I would recommend is with those particular cards, so the V60s, UHS2 cards, double check and make sure that the model number, so the part number of that card, matches what our validation was on it. Because I know that there are series within the ProGrade cards that are slightly different. So there are some, the early UHS2 V60 cards that wouldn't always work. And then there were later ones. The later ones should have an R on the front of the card. So I know this is a V90 card, but you should see this R on your V60 card. If you don't, it means that that card might be the older version of the card there. And if that's kind of happening, double check with ProGrade, because I believe they did also have... I believe there was a change to some of those cards. So that could be what might be causing some of your issue there. Anytime you see like a hang on the camera after you've been shooting, it's usually down to media, and it can be any kind of challenge because of either card storage, that kind of thing. So it does have the R. So in that particular case, if it does have the R, I would recommend taking a look at ProGrade's formatting and conditioning tool that they have for the SD cards. I don't know where it is offhand, but if you go to ProGrade, they have a program that you can download that basically checks the condition of the card and reconditions it. I would try running that. Make sure that everything's kind of base level set on the card. It'll give you a kind of readout of the health of the card, and then try again from there. Outside of that, if things are still a little wonky with it, I'd contact ProGrade at that point, because we have tested the V60 cards from ProGrade, and they are on the list as being tested and should work fine. So, Calico, the approved lists are down in the description. You can take a look, click on the description, and go there. D Creative, where can we get a list of acceptable V60 cards? Use the lists down in the description below. They go right to our published compatibility charts. They tell you whether it's V60, V90, and it depends camera to camera. Not every camera has validation for V60 cards. DM Films, Lexar versus ProGrade, what's better compatibility with Lumix cameras? Both have varying levels of compatibility with our cameras. I'm not one to say one is better than the other. Personally, I work with pretty much all the various different cards. I may be super lucky. I've not had card failures outside of... I think I had one really old Sandisk card fail, but that was probably down more to the fact that the card was ridiculously old and I kept it for way longer than my typical, personal line in the sand of how long I keep memory cards for. I don't keep memory cards for typically more than a year with the amount of shooting I do. And I don't even do a ton of shooting. If I'm a professional, I'm replacing cards every season, potentially even sooner than that. Memory cards have finite read and write. All media storage has finite read and write cycles. If you do a lot of work, if you do a lot of video recording, if you do a ton of stills capture, budget yourself that you would be replacing cards either multiple times a year or at least once a year. It's just good practice. It's the same, it's the reason why we moved from hard disks to one of the reasons we moved from hard disks to SSDs in computers, because When was the last time you remembered you had to go in and defragment a hard drive? You used to have to do that all the time because they wear down over time. Modern SSDs have wear leveling, things like that. As you get newer card specs, as you get faster cards, as we push media harder and harder onto those memory cards, it's a part of the thing you have to kind of keep in mind with the higher spec that you go in the devices. Yeah, so I don't care what the brand is. Personally, I go by what the rated validation list is for us, because it just works. So yeah. All right. Thanks everybody for this week. I know this is a bit light on the specifics about video. Next week we're going to go much deeper into specifics of features, capabilities. Like I said, next week we're probably going to talk about audio next week. And we're probably going to talk about diving deeper in with the recording functions that you have within the camera, because we have a lot of other stuff as like a little bit of a sneak peek. We have a lot of capabilities, like being able to come in and record, things like segmented file recordings, loop recording, focus transitions, live cropping. These are all things that we have within these cameras that we haven't really talked much about, and I think some people may know about them, some people may not. So yeah, we will start with that particular set of topics next week, and then, like I said, I will work on trying to see if we can get Matt Fraser in here on the third week of this setup, and that's where we'll dive in most likely into exposure tools, and the kind of more specialty functions that we have within these cameras, namely probably anamorphic and that side of it. Other than that, if you like the stream, if you like these general topics, let us know down in the comment. If you have particular questions that you want to see answered, video specific, over the next couple of weeks, make sure to drop those down in the comments after the video publishes. This way we can go through. I can make sure that I can, if I have to prepare something, I can get that addressed. If I don't know an answer, I can connect with like Matt or someone who may know the answers. And yeah, we'll be back next Thursday, 2 p.m. Eastern time here on YouTube. Otherwise, like the video, subscribe if you don't, share it to someone who you think may be interested in these broadcasts, and have a great day, have a great weekend, get out there, create some cool stuff, and yeah, talk to you all later. Bye.